Agreed. Carried. Item 9. The next item is Senator Dasko's survey and provides information on whether or not surveys are an acceptable use of Senate resources. I invite Charles Feldman, Parliamentary Counsel, and Pierre Langto, Chief Financial Officer, to the witness table. Gentlemen, do you have any opening comments?
Yes, I will start. Honorable Senators, my colleague Charles Feldman from the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel and me will present the situation related to the contract for research on opinion conducted by an external supplier for the Senator Dasko. I will discuss the procurement aspects and Charles will provide a summary of the review completed by legal services. At Senator Dasko's request, the procurement team put in place a contract with an external opinion search firm in the last quarter of 2018-19. According to the Senator's Management Office policy, only the Finance and Procurement Directorate has the authority to enter into a contract with the supplier when the value is greater than $2,500. The Senator's office provided the procurement team with a statement of work for this request. The statement of work stated that the contractor will generate research on the public's opinion on the Senate of Canada for the use by the Honourable Senator in the exercise of her parliamentary functions. L'équipe des acquisitions a effectué les vérifications habituelles avant de...
The procurement team did the usual checks before proceeding with a contract with the supplier. Among other things, they made sure that the senator had the available budget for the contract and that the statement of work confirmed that the required services were for parliamentary functions. So the contract signed with the external company included the standard terms and conditions of the Senate. Charles will now present his comments, and then I would be pleased to answer any questions and hear your comments.
My name is Charlie Feldman, and I'm pleased to appear before you this morning, my first time before SEBA, to supplement my colleagues' remarks and to provide the applicable legal analysis to the survey expense currently being reviewed. I will not go into the detail that's in the note before you, but for the benefit of anyone listening, I'll provide a general overview of the applicable legal test. As senators are aware, this committee has the authority to determine whether any previous, current, or proposed use of Senate resources is a proper use for the carrying out of parliamentary functions. The term parliamentary functions is defined in the Senate administrative rules as follows. Responsabilités et activités se rattachant.
Parliamentary functions means duties and activities related to the role of a senator and its proceedings wherever performed and may include public or official business, whether or not they are performed in a partisan manner.
The definition to make two observations. The first is that the initial part of the applicable test permits an expense related to the role of the senator or the activity of the Senate. I don't think there's much dispute that this survey relates to the Senate and the role of senators. However, the second part of the threshold is more complicated and undoubtedly the reason we're here today. The definition of parliamentary functions draws a distinction between what is permissible, namely partisan parliamentary functions, and certain electoral-related matters in relation to which an expense is impermissible. The definition of parliamentary functions specifically enumerates what is carved out from it. Par exemple, les activités liées à l'élection d'un député à la Chambre des communes.
For example, activities related to the election of an MP in the House of Commons under the Canada Elections Act are excluded from the definition of parliamentary functions. Also excluded are activities to support or criticize during a federal election a political party or candidate.
Going from the definitions provided, it is possible to have a survey that is non-partisan, partisan, or electoral in nature. Each of these is obviously a range, and reasonable people can disagree. In theory, one can have an extremely hyper-partisan survey that does not transgress into the prohibited electoral-related category. Malheureusement, on n'arrive pas à trouver une décision.
Unfortunately, we cannot find a previous decision from this committee about surveys that we could use to make the distinction between what is acceptable and not.
Line between electoral-related matters and partisan surveys, there is less certainty for senators, and ultimately these sorts of questions will return to this committee time and again. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
With that, I think we have Senator Batters.
Thanks very much. So how I see this particular issue of this $15,000 poll, I see two primary issues. First of all, that part that you just referred to in the Senate administrative rules, the portion that I think that was not met here is the part dealing with parliamentary functions in sub B, where it says supporting or opposing a political party or individual candidate in the context of a federal, provincial, territorial, or municipal election or any other local election. That is it has to, that is not allowed because that particular type of activity falls outside of the scope of the allowable portion earlier stated in that section. And so I don't think Senator Dasko's poll in this case conformed to that section of the Senate Administrative Rules. Two of her poll questions specifically deal with election commitments and party election promises. And those two questions are, first of all, one question was, in 2016, the government changed the following practices with regard to the Senate of Canada. Please tell me if you think each of the following is a good change or not a good change. Then they deal specifically with three sub-items dealing with the Trudeau government Senate independent process. And then the second question also that I think falls outside that scope is the question, and looking ahead, do you think a future government should keep these changes or go back to the previous ways of appointing senators? So first of all, the 2015 Liberal Party election platform promised to create, quote, a new non-partisan merit-based process to advise the Prime Minister on Senate appointments. And then one of the first major announcements made by the Trudeau government was just that. So as well, after Andrew Scheer became leader of the Conservative Party, media asked him at that point whether he would continue this Trudeau government Senate independent process, and he said no. Then last November, Senator Wu, the leader of the Independent Senators Group, he did media interviews where he said that the future of the Trudeau government Senate experiment should be an issue in the 2019 election. And Senator Wu called upon the leaders of the opposition parties in the House of Commons to state their position on this for the election so that Canadians could choose. Then a few months later, after Senator Wu, the leader of the Independent Senators Group, made that comment, then Senator Dasko of the Independent Senators Group did this push poll asking Canadians about what their thought of the 2015 Liberal election campaign promise was and whether they want to, quote, go back to the old ways of appointing senators. The wording of those poll questions is designed to lead to a certain result. And I contrast Senator Dasko's poll with actually there have been a couple of polls that Senator Elaine McCoy has done on the issue of independent Senate, and on those ones, she actually appropriately straddled the line in those particular polls. It did not cross the line into talking about election issues, which in this particular case talked about the 2015 election issue and upcoming 2019 election issue, and within 6 months of an election. And I think for those reasons, this one contravenes the rule, because I think Senator Dasko's poll did cross that line. So I think that in this respect, one of the things I wanted to say was I think that that $15,000 amount should be repaid. But secondly, I also wanted to state that I think that the Senate finance procedure surrounding their approval of polls should be tightened, because when we examined this issue, we found that Senate finance does not look at the poll questions to determine whether the poll complies with the Senate administrative rules. And poll questions are generally part of the contract. Having been involved in that sort of area before, I know that. And as such, I think that they should be examined. It would not be an onerous activity. Very few polls have been conducted by senators. And in this particular case, there were only 10 poll questions. I don't think that we can rely, for a $15,000 expense, I don't think we can rely on a senator signing something very brief saying, this is for parliamentary business. That is exactly the sort of thing that we got into trouble for when we had the Senate expenses scandal, and we have to be very vigilant on that sort of activity. So I would propose, secondly, that Senate Finance should be looking at those poll questions to determine whether our rules have been properly complied with. Thank you.
Senator Dean.
Thanks, Chair. Let me first thank our colleagues in the administration for a terrific briefing note and for your review of it today. I will say that when I looked at the note early this morning, I thought the questions were pertinent, and I looked at the key questions that were canvassed by our administration colleagues, and it seemed to me that it was pretty clear in finding that Senator Dasko's contract for a survey was a proper expense in carrying out her parliamentary functions. So I'd like to just review that note very briefly, if I could. It reviews the nature and specific aspects of parliamentary functions, as well as the contracting and procurement framework, and we now know that a concern is with respect to parliamentary functions. The analysis section of the note outlines advice to CBER, and I want to draw your attention to the following commentary and conclusions. And I've pretty much been doing this on the fly, so if I hesitate at certain points, please forgive me. I'm going to go, I guess, to the note reviews parliamentary functions and procurement requirements, and then it goes to the analysis, and I'm going to read some sections of that analysis. If a senator wishes to obtain the opinion of Canadians in respect of matters before or relating to the Senate, a survey is an appropriate way of obtaining this information. Finance has put in place contracts for senators in the past, and this doesn't seem to be in dispute, so I'm taking it we all accept that. In the case of Senator Dasko's survey contract, Finance was approached by the Senator and provided with a statement of work and was entered into on behalf of the Senate with a research corporation for work to be provided by Senator Dasko. It continues, the contractor will generate research on the public's opinion of the Senate of Canada for use by the Honourable Donna Dasko in the exercise of her parliamentary functions. The note then discusses the definitions and application of parliamentary functions before concluding that in the case of Senator Dasko's survey, it relates to the Senate, and none of the questions posed in the survey clearly and directly relate to the electoral activities specifically excluded from the parliamentary functions definition. The note then kind of reviews some further questions and continues. Although the concept of independent senators is associated with the current Liberal government and could become a policy issue in the upcoming federal election, there is no explicit election-related theme or tone in the survey. The survey clearly relates to the Senate. It was sent to people across Canada, was not focused on people in a particular electoral district or party, which are tests with respect to parliamentary function. It was sent to people across Canada, not specific to a particular electoral district or party. The survey was sent to individuals by phone or online. It was not conducted during a political event. To the knowledge of the Law Clerk's Office and Finance, the results of the survey have not been used for political party fundraising or any election-related activities. Therefore, based on the information available, the survey appears to fall within the scope of a senator's parliamentary functions. So in conclusion, and I think you can assume that this is now not the advice just of our colleagues, but it's my determination as well as an independent senator in this place. So we're now not just talking about advice, we're talking about a conclusion that I have reached, and I want that to go in the record. So the memo consists of clearly of both legal and financial advice provided by the administration and our legal experts, and based on that advice, there is clearly no foundation to suggest that there is anything wrong with polling in general, and in particular to Senator Dasko's polling. There are precedents for senators using their office budget to conduct polling, and this is reflected in the proactive disclosures of contracts in senators' offices. Just to conclude, in addition to this, if there's any suggestion here that Senator Dasko's development of this survey and the operation of it is in any way a partisan activity that would otherwise call it into question, I want to just quickly review the Senator's Office management policy, which we've just been chatting about, and each of the partisan activities that it expressly prohibits. And there are 6 of them, and I'll be very brief. Under 5.18.1, the first prohibited activity, which is partisan, the solicitation of party membership. Does Senator Dasko's poll violate that? Clearly not. The second one, B, solicitation of political donations. Does the contract with the polling firm commissioned by Senator Dasko in any way violate that? Clearly not. The third, C, registration fees to political party events. Is that violated? Clearly not. D, political party leadership events. Is it violated? Clearly not. And E, Senate resources, including human resources, must not be used to support the following partisan activities: federal, provincial, territorial or municipal election campaigns, including nomination meetings. Is this provision violated? Clearly not. And finally, F, the production of materials on political party letterhead and or that contain political party logos. Is that violated? Absolutely not. These prohibitions on the use of our budgets are very thorough and very precise, as is the legal and administrative advice we've received today. Our rules and policies clearly allow for polling contracts. Other senators have done polling contracts. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I'll simply conclude by saying that that is not just the advice of our administration colleagues. That is my determination also. Thank you.
Senators, if I could request we be brief, we have a lot of speakers on here, so we're going to run out of time. Senator Marshall, Tanis, and St. Germain.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I will be brief. In the appendix, it includes the questions that were asked in the survey, and the two that I wanted to focus in on is the one that says in 2016, government changed the practice with regard to the Senate of Canada. And then one of the questions was, looking ahead, do you think a future government should keep these changes or go back to the previous ways of appointing senators? And the way it's worded there, that I think, this is my opinion, is that it's setting the stage for a debate on the Senate appointment process in the October election. And when you look back to see what we can't spend our money on, one of the items is supporting or opposing a political party in the context of a federal, provincial, territorial, or municipal election. I mean, this issue with regard to the appointment process for senators, that's already been out there. You can see it's looming out there waiting for the election. I know that that Mr. Scheer has already been asked whether he was going to change the process. And sort of to add fuel to the fire, Senator Wu was on Twitter, and now he's calling on Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Scheer and Mr. Singh to respond in advance of the fall election. So the survey is actually being used now in the election process, and that is not permitted under our rules. I mean, the survey, it says here when the Senate admin decided whether it was a bona fide expenditure, says how was the survey to be subsequently used or disseminated? Were the results used in support of a political party? It's definitely going to be used in support of the Liberal Party. I think that question in the survey is aimed right into the middle of the federal election, and I don't think that survey should be a bona fide expense of the Senate.
Senator Tanis.
I have to say I don't see it as clearly as Senator Dean, and I think the questions that have been pointed to are the result of that, and whether it's coincidental or orchestrated, went right into the Twitter feed of Senator Wu, where he very deliberately, and it's his right to inject this question into the election. It's all, wonderful timing for everybody that a poll gets done and the numbers get fed, and suddenly we're calling on party leaders to do things. This is, if it isn't over the line, it is uncomfortably close to the line. And whenever we get into this space, we need to take note of it, and we need to make sure that we are not crossing the line. Because if we say yes to this, then somebody else with extra money in their office budget will be applying for a poll tomorrow, and we'll see where we go with it. we all need to think about that when we take a poll, for whatever reason it is that we're taking the poll. And I have to say, I am uncomfortable with this. At a minimum, we need to clarify this and make sure that, in my view, we don't get as close to the line as we are right now, because this opens up an activity that where we do not want to go there. And all,
Senator
by the way,
Singh.
from an independent senator, which is a non-partisan independent senator, which also troubles me.
Senator Saint-Germain, then Senator Monsieur, and Senator Tkachuk.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Very specifically in reference to what you have stressed as being involvement in an election, I would like to refer you to what is clearly stated, the legal opinion that we have before us by expert, independent, and neutral lawyers. And I'll say it in English because I have the briefing note in English.
Does not count as a parliamentary function. The Senate administrative rules talk about whether or not an expense was incurred during an election under the Canada Election Act and in the context of a federal, provincial, territorial, or municipal election or any other local election. This poll we are talking about was not conducted during an election or in the context of an election. Je continue en français.
I will continue in French. When a government, a political party that is elected, whichever party it may be, and as a government makes their election promises become public policy, are we concluding today that from this point forward, no senator will be able to, for the purposes of their parliamentary functions, consult the public or conduct research or surveys on public policy issues, be it issues related to international trade, Senate modernization? I think this is an issue. My final point is this. If we are to conclude, despite a very clear legal opinion, that there is here an expenditure that was unauthorized, then I think that in all fairness and in being fully responsible, CIBA must therefore determine that it should investigate on the use by some senators of their resources paid for by public funds, particularly public Twitter accounts, websites, the partisan use of those resources. So what is good for one is good for the other, and what is bad for one is bad for the rest. And I think that this discussion is a waste of time because the legal opinion is quite clear. The interpretation of SARS is extremely clear. And if we have to make more clarification, which I don't think is necessary, then we should give them the mandate to one of the subcommittees to clarify the rules and do it as a team without partisanship, because I think that this morning, if we conclude that this survey was not compliant with the rules, then we have to look at a certain number of practices and use of public funds of the Senate by some members of the Senate. Thank you.
Senator Tkachuk, Delphine, and Umidvar. Sorry, Senator Monsieur, my apologies.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to make some comments on things that have been said just to clarify. Senator Batters talked about a push poll. A push poll is a way of insinuating or taking away the professional quality associated with a survey that was done in due form by a company. It's a marketing tool, a push poll, whereas a survey done by a company such as this one is a tool that provides information and it concerns the general public. So we'll have to be careful about the words we use when we talk about a survey that was done properly. Senator Batters also mentioned that the Senate finance
Questions that are on a poll. Si c'est le cas, il va falloir que la communication.
If that's the case, then We'll have to look at all the communication documents put on Twitter, Facebook, and so forth. We'll have to ensure that communications looks at all this, verifying things. The expenditure, there's no problem because it has to be approved. But the issues of surveys or communications, well, I think that is part of the work associated with the senators' offices, and this should not necessarily go there. So we're talking about Twitter and Senator Wu, who used the information to send things on Twitter that could be political. Well, once the poll has been made public, it no longer, it's a survey. It was an opinion that was collected by a well-known company. And what communications does with it after, well, you can't control that. That you use it, even you conservatives use it to your benefit by saying, well, look, there are questions in here that benefit us, or if it's used by other groups, any groups. I even seen this poll mentioned on CTV National News, and the information that was taken from it was information that was not necessarily beneficial for the Senate's reputation. So I just want us to be careful. We also talked to Senator Tanis, who talked about independent senators who are not partisan. We fully agree with you. We're not supposed to be partisan. And what is done after the fact with the information that is published, we have no control over it. The other thing is that we mustn't confuse research on policies and support for a political party. Currently, the document that we have in our hands is a document that corresponded to research on policies. And there was, a few years ago, other senators in the independent senators group who conducted surveys, and there were questions in there that were similar to that by Senator Dasko that were not raised at that time. And why 2 years ago was it okay, and today the same thing is occurring, and it's not okay. Now, with regard to the legal opinion that we've received and the questions that were asked were legitimate ones, and I think that it is important to understand that concept. And I come back to the notion of the idea of what happens after the fact with the information is something we cannot control. And the advice is clear and specific, and it respects the policies. The advice is that in this current case, there has been a respect of the policies. It's allowed. So there has been no violation of policy here. We can try to nitpick. Yes, Mr. Chair. But what were the questions used for? Ultimately, we feel that it was not political. The rules were followed. We feel that this is not an unauthorized use.
To speak, if I could please request you to be brief, because I have to end the meeting at 10 to 10 because there are a couple of items in camera that have to be dealt with. So please. Senator Tkachuk, Delphine, Umidvar.
Well, the fact that we're having a discussion proves it's political, for one thing. There's no question about that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. There's a number of items that, first, Mr. Feldman did not say that this was clearly not political. Mr. Feldman actually said that there was the murkiness in the rule, and therefore that's why we're having this discussion. So let's not draw conclusions that haven't been concluded by the advice that we're getting from our staff. But I'd like to know, there's two issues here. One is it is a political poll, no matter how you cut it, which should not have been paid for by the Senate. If it is, we're running down a big rabbit hole here. That's for sure. And the second point: how did this get approved? How did this contract get approved? We know there's some murkiness in the definition. So what happened here? Did the payment, when the payment was made, who looked at the questions? Didn't anybody in finance say, "Ooh, maybe I should check about this"? Or did it just go as a regular contract, as if she was hiring an employee or a contracted employee? This was definitely, we don't often do polls here. And then after the poll was done, was there not some kind of a process as to whether it was a political poll or not. How would anybody in finance know? How did that get paid for?
Guys,
Well, their role is to ask if they're not sure. How did they know to be sure? How did they know to be sure? I'm just asking. Somebody should know. What was the process? What was the actual process for approving the payment of the contract?
Actually, the payment has not been made yet.
Oh, that's good.
So, because the we've received
that's
the invoice,
interesting.
we received the invoice, but we have not paid yet because the issue was raised and we're waiting for confirmation. So,
Excellent. I thought it
it's
was paid
clarified.
for, so it's not paid for yet. Well, that's a very different situation now, because
okay,
well,
Lucy,
it has to be
please.
authorized. I don't think. First of all, I don't think the Senate should pay for this. I think that Senator Dasko or whoever.
Can I ask
Lucy,
for
please.
the
You don't
wanna
authority
argue
of the
with me,
chair
or
to be
let me finish?
Excuse me,
respected, please?
one person, please. Lucy, please.
I think Senator Dasko should pay for this contract. This is not a contract that the Senate should pay for, because it's clearly a political contract. And so anyway, I'm gonna leave it at that. And my point is known. So
Senator Dalphon, Umidvar, and Platt.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. The question we're asking here, independently of all the political spins that we want to make, is essentially to see whether the rules, the Senate administrative rules, have been respected or not. I looked attentively, carefully at the note that was prepared by Mr. Feldman that summarizes the facts brought to his attention, and I've heard nothing today to say that these facts are incomplete. It seems, in fact, that it's uncontested, particularly with regard to the precedent and the fact that she asked for the authorization. And I would note that the analysis of all the questions posed in the survey were looked at, and I've heard nothing here this morning that tells me that the summaries are not the questions asked, and that wasn't the method. So we have come to a conclusion by an outside party. After I've heard the comments, I don't think that there is a objective analysis, but rather an attempt at political gain. But if we agree that a third party has done a full independent analysis, a non-partisan analysis, and the conclusion is that although the independent senator group is associated with the current Liberal government and could become a policy issue in the upcoming federal election, there is no explicit election-related theme or tone in the survey. The survey clearly relates to the Senate. Therefore, based on the information available, the survey appears to fall within the scope of a senator's parliamentary functions. When I read that note and I did my own analysis, I felt this was quite a reasonable conclusion, and I have no hesitation in supporting it.
Senators, we have 10 minutes left. We have a hard stop at 10 o'clock, and I really do need to go on camera for one or two items. If I could suggest that we carry on the debate next week, and if there is something to be done, then we need a motion that we can vote on. So if somebody wishes to bring a motion or whatever motion that is, I suggest you come with a motion, and we'll carry on with the last four speakers next week. Is that all right? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, when we start at 8, I think the next meeting in this particular room is at 10:30. So don't we have to, isn't our
She
hard
says
stop at 10:15 instead of 10?
Broadcasting, there's a hard stop at 10 today.
Why?
Because there's a conflict with respect to the broadcasting crew.
The next panel, Foreign Affairs, on which I'm on, has video witnesses, and that's longer.
Anyway, we're not going to debate.
Listen, I'm just there's a question asked. I'm giving you the answer. It's because it's going to be video conferencing.
Chair, I'm happy with your suggestion. I'm on that list, but I would like to very quickly ask a question. I want to continue with debate next week, but I would like to ask a question that's somewhat in relation to what Senator Tkachuk said. So we know this hasn't been paid for yet, but was it approved before she did it? Did she bring the questions in, and was it approved before she did it? I would like that question answered, and if it's not answered today, it can be answered next week. That's fine. But that is very important to this conversation as to whether or not it was approved ahead of time.
So why don't we answer the question next week? Because honestly, we're going to run out of time. Because that'll lead to another question. So we'll carry on the debate next week. And if that's okay with senators. And if there is a motion, I'd like somebody to bring a motion forward and we can vote on that. Otherwise, we will.
I thought I was next on the speaking list.
Yeah, yes, you are. But we're going to run out of time.
I'm confused as to what we are doing. Are we?
No, we are going to
closing the
carry
debate?
on the debate next week. And you'll be first on the list next week.
But I was ahead of Senator Platt.
No, you won't. No, but his was not really, his was ready to end the motion. It wasn't making a comment on the thing. So it wasn't a part of the debate. He was just suggesting a solution to moving it forward. Is that okay, senators? We'll carry on the debate next week. If then we could go in camera.